Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room, a show that likes to look at issues locally, provincially, nationally, internationally. You name it, we'll cover it. I'm Robin Adair, and across town is my partner in crime, my co-host with the most, John Jurisic. And John, I guess our big starter questions revolve around training. We can go from Johnny Cash, I see a train a-coming, all the way over to the Clash, which would be something like train in vain. Which is it?
Doesn't sound good, Robin. Doesn't sound good. Apparently, Canada has decided it will not fund the rail restoration through the land of a First Nation community. So the land is reverting back to the Nanoose area Snow-Noes First Nation. This decision was handed down by both Transport Canada and the province. So the return of rail services on the 290-kilometer railway has just hit a major barrier. Additionally, the province announced $18 million to be spent on future corridor planning affecting First Nations and regional districts. Whenever government announces something that there's more planning, you know that it's going to be a long time before anything materializes. Minister Rob Fleming says any future corridor use must involve First Nations communities. He says reconciliation and the railway's future are inseparable. So, as we discussed last week, several of the First Nations bands just pulled out of the Corridor Coalition's application to Ottawa. Well, now we'll see what happens to those portions of the corridor, Robin, where First Nations remain supportive of rail transport.
It's a shame if we throw all the rail out because once it's gone, it'll never come back. Larry Stevenson and his corridor group worked so hard to try to make this all happen, and I guess we'll know more in the days ahead, and we'll try to keep you up to speed with that and get as much information as we can. But we're going to shift topics now, John. We're going to talk about what's been going on in Ottawa and across the country, for that matter. Chinese. And when I say Chinese, I mean the Chinese government of Beijing, their interference in the Canadian political process. Our CSIS, National Security Wing, they sent a memo off to Foreign Affairs and said that the Beijing government has been directing Canadians with ties to mainland China to send money and also active support to help target certain Liberal ridings, including the Prime Minister's riding. And that's over the last two elections. It's to make sure that the Liberals stay in power. They even bust in international students to get out there and put up lawn signs and go door knocking. And why does the Prime Minister continue to resist an official investigation?
Anytime we are presented with evidence, we act. If we have been presented with credible evidence of wrongdoing, of foreign agents or officials breaking Canadian laws, we would have acted. Lack of evidence means we have not acted. We are a country of laws, of rules, of evidence. And if we do not get concrete, clear evidence, we will not take action. That's what Canadians expect.
Robin, I've been a Justin Trudeau supporter. I support his government. I voted for them. It used to be that we could talk about stuff, about policy. We could actually talk about stuff. I don't know when the last time anything came out of Ottawa that we could actually discuss. What are they doing? Trudeau looks really weak on this. And he keeps saying there's no evidence and suggests he'll hire a special investigator. Is that all that's coming out of Ottawa? Can we actually do something here? But here's what Fenella Sung of the Canadian Friends of Hong Kong has said about all of this. A public inquiry is needed into foreign influence by the Chinese government and its Canadian supporters, including the financing and operation of Canadian political parties. I agree. I'm beginning to wonder if Justin Trudeau can survive all of this stuff. Beijing deserves a firm slap. Some kind of repercussions, Robin, have to happen. I don't get it. We talked about this last week and said that the Chinese in this case are underhanded.
And, we've also received well, we've received some slaps, John, some concern by some of our viewers about some of our language. A viewer who's a regular follower of the Rumble Room sent us this note and taking exception to the use of the word Chinese. Kevin writes us, actually, it was China's interference, not Chinese. There are millions of Chinese who have nothing to do with China. He goes on to say that language matters as does form. It is not correct and actually harmful to keep hammering on Chinese interference when it is China's interference. And finally, he adds, it's like saying the Irish set off bombs in London when it was the IRA, or Quebecers kidnapped Laporte when it was the FLQ. Well, Kevin, I do think you make a valid point overall, and I would only counter that on the Rumble Room, at least, we have been very clear that we are critical of the Beijing government's interference in the Canadian electoral process. And there are, unfortunately, more recent arrivals to Canada who are of Chinese extraction who are being pressured by this same Beijing government to get in line, send money, send support, and are being pulled in. I believe many of them are not necessarily thrilled about the fact they're being influenced in this way. The whole point in this big kerfuffle is that it's unfair for anyone from outside of our borders to be influencing our electoral process, whether they're the Chinese, whether they're the Russian government, whether they're the American government. And this interference is simply wrong, and that is how we should express it.
To be fair to the Rumble Room producers, which are us, we've had speakers on speaking directly to this Chinese influence into our community. Absolutely, Robin. And needless to say, we both value our Chinese Canadian friends and neighbors and do not imply ever that they're tied into any of this. As a matter of fact, as we've demonstrated numerous times in the past, we believe that by shining a light on this Beijing behavior, we're actually protecting our local Chinese community from offshore pressure and influence. Anyway, point made. Thank you, Kevin. Anyway, let's shift topics again, Robin.
What a capital notion, John. Let's do just that. And, I have to say I'm very concerned about the way things are being handled with our natural resources and our resource industries. We've had some major announcements over the last few weeks that I think are really, they're bad news on a lot of levels. For example, we've had the federal government pulling the plug on open net fish farming on northern Vancouver Island, Discovery Islands first, more operations to follow. And that's fine. The First Nations themselves want to protect their natural West Coast salmon stock, but at the same time, they want to protect industries that provide jobs and provide opportunities for people in these communities. And why wouldn't the federal government then say we're going to then provide money to help set up closed pen farming operations like they have in Europe? Why don't we look at ways that we can keep these industries alive in a different and more environmentally friendly way? I also have concerns about liquefied natural gas. It just seems like it's dragging on and on. You keep hearing about other countries that are getting their plants built and are already exporting and making lots and lots of breakthroughs in terms of economic links. And BC is very slow off the mark. And then we have all these announcements of sawmills closing, pulp mills closing, thousands and thousands of jobs disappearing or are now at risk. These are high-paying jobs that keep families alive and keep families going. You can't build the whole economy on tourism and the civil service. We need to keep our industries alive. So what does Premier David Eby have to say right now about the forest industry?
Today I'm announcing that we are launching new measures on old growth, innovation, and forest stewardship. First, I'm pleased to share that we're tripling the number of forest landscape planning tables from 4 to 12. These 8 new planning tables will include the participation of approximately 50 First Nations, along with communities and industry. Backed by $25 million in new funding, these tables will focus on regions where new deferrals and permanent protections are possible quickly. Secondly, We're ramping up government investments to support innovation in the forestry industry. By doubling the BC Manufacturing Jobs Fund to $180 million and making it open to projects province-wide, we'll help mills retrofit to use smaller trees or to manufacture higher value wood products such as mass timber to get more jobs per tree.
It would be great if we could retool our forest industry. Come on, let's get with the program. There's massive amounts of secondary manufacturing that could be evolved from our core forest industry activity. You know, folks tried to retool this industry in the 90s, but found remanufacturing plants were too expensive and the profit margin simply wasn't there. That's quite possibly not the case anymore. With the advancements in technology and innovation, I really hope they can look at some better ideas this time. We need our resource economy. Come on, people. So let's talk to somebody who's been deeply involved in the energy sector for years. Ellis Ross was formerly the Haisla chief in Kitimat and was a driving force behind LNG development. He's currently the BC Liberal MLA for Skeena. Let's zoom him in. Now joining us again in the Rumble Room is the BC Liberal MLA for Skeena, a former Haisla chief, Ellis Ross. Great to have you back, Ellis.
Good to be back, guys. Nice to see you again.
Totally. We got a bunch of questions for you. My first one is about logging. We've just had Neil Young and David Suzuki leading a protest demanding a halt to all old growth logging. We've also had protesters tossing paint on the woolly mammoth in the BC Museum, demanding energy production be curtailed. Robin and I cannot contain our anger around that. We keep hearing, Ellis, that there are First Nations chiefs supporting these protests, while at the same time, we hear First Nations actually operating businesses like sawmills, and their chiefs asking for the timber supply to continue. So are we facing a renewed war in the woods? Is there a solution to this issue? What is your take on all this?
I think it's the government actually pandering to the minority in terms of the protests, as well as using First Nations as a shield. I mean, if you want to cut back logging as a government, great, but don't drag First Nations into it. I mean, First Nations got their first taste of economic reality back in 2006 when the BC government actually gave them a volume of timber to log themselves, as well as shared in revenue sharing coming from forestry. So a lot of First Nations right now are logging old growth in their own territories and their neighboring territories, by the way. It was their first step away from the Indian Act. And now we're starting to see them just the same way as they did with the caribou up in the Peace region. They couldn't do a conservation plan on their own. They had to sign an agreement with First Nations. And this is so sad. Why are you using First Nations as your shield? Whether it be against those loggers who can lose jobs, or communities who can lose the economy, or those environmental protesters who this government is afraid of. I mean, grow a spine and do it on your own. Don't use First Nations in this manner. Don't use them for politics. That's my take.
Well, like we have the federal government also just taking some major steps, and it's all to do with fish farming. They've announced the closure of open pen Atlantic fish farming operations in the Discovery Islands, and that's going to start very soon here. And they're talking about even wider closures. Many of these operations are owned and operated by First Nations. And of course, the salmon canning business, many of the people that work in that industry are also First Nations folks. So in your mind, why would the federal government not fund closed-penned Atlantic salmon operations like they have in places like Norway? Everybody says that's the alternative. Why not lay out some money to help support these industries, keep these people working, especially First Nations? If we want reconciliation, don't we have to put some money behind it?
Without a doubt. And you know what? It's politics. I mean, I read the Cohen Commission report when it came out because I was concerned about fish farms and ocean ranching I was concerned about. And the Cohen Commission never said anything about fish farms being detrimental to wild salmon stocks. They mentioned a whole bunch of different factors, including environmental degradation, the oceans warming up. There was very little mention of fish farms. So basically what the Cohen Commission was saying is, said, look, address all these other major issues and we might have a chance at addressing wild salmon stocks. But because of the politics, not only with salmon stocks, but also with this idea behind UNDRIP, talking about new partnerships and giving First Nations more authority, doing all this economic reconciliation, when in reality, what you're really doing is taking it away. I mean, rights and title has now evolved to a point where the economic component is ever more present in these First Nation communities because, let's face it, these First Nation communities need an answer to Indian Act funding. They need an answer to poverty. They need an answer to imprisonment, their kids going into government care, and they need answers to suicide. In my time, the only thing that has helped resolve this in a major, significant way was economic development. So I think this is just politics at the highest level.
Ellis, it's just fantastic and courageous, frankly, getting a political leader on the program who's willing to speak out on these important issues, still with energy and protests. You must be very concerned about reports of sabotage to new gas pipelines in the north, as the drive to get LNG to Kitimat continues to hit opposition. Is this sabotage real? Do you still believe the BC LNG industry is going to make it, be successful?
Well, everybody agrees with LNG. The NDP, after years of opposing LNG, when they got into government, they approved LNG with the largest tax breaks in BC history. This latest round of attacks, though, can't be confirmed because it was just an anonymous post on a website. But what was real was the 4 police cars that got burned in an ambulance at Smithers. That was real. The attacks on those pipeline workers in the middle of the night outside of Houston on a forestry road, that was real. The idea that someone was trying to light a truck on fire while there was people in it, people wielding axes, and that was a coordinated attack. You can't tell me that this was just the run-of-the-mill protesters. And my whole point about this is, number one, this is happening in Canada. And when you look up the definition of terrorism, this fits the bill perfectly. And number two is, we don't have any reports in terms of what is actually happening out there, who is being put in harm's way, and do we have any leads? Where are these protesters coming from? Because when I'm talking to people in Smithers and Houston, they're saying, well, some of these people have American credit cards. Some of them speak French. And so I've got a number of questions then. Where do they come from? Are they paid? And right now I'm only going on hearsay. I'm really reading what's on social media, so I don't want to go out and say anything. But if anybody's got the facts, it's got to be in those reports that I'm assuming are sitting on the desks of the BC government.
We're going to change topics a little bit to swing to something else that I know is something you've been talking quite a bit about. I've seen your broadcasts on social media, and for people who are interested in hearing more of your points of view, you're very generous on Twitter about expressing your points of view on a lot of things there, Ellis, and we appreciate that. I wanted to ask you about new money from the province that's going to be going to beds and treatment for people with addictions and the mentally ill. And I think it's widely believed in the country and in the province that this needs to be done. On the other hand, there is a debate about decriminalization of all drugs and narcotics and how this could go. And I understand you have some reservations about this step.
Yeah, and to begin with, I've always pointed out my bias in terms of drugs and alcohol for that matter, because I grew up around it. I'm still living in it. I still live on reserve. I still go talk to the people on the streets of Hastings, Prince George, and Terrace. And so I see the effect it has on regular British Columbians, but I know for a fact it has a disproportionate effect on Aboriginals, and it has so for years. And my friends and family are living this nightmare. And then people from all over BC are messaging me and telling me about their own kids and their own friends that are actually suffering with this. And it's not what is being characterized by the government or the media. And so I just think that this whole decriminalization and this whole attitude we're taking toward drugs is, we're not taking it serious enough. We're not having a province-wide conversation about this. The decriminalization was actually an agreement between the federal government and the provincial government. It never went to provincial debate. And then the whole idea that this company in Langley had got approval to process coca leaves, turn it into cocaine, and commercialize it. Now, the PC government, we questioned them on it. They were totally shocked and surprised. Federal government, totally shocked and surprised. Come on.
But
You're the government. You're
what
the
about
government.
safe supply? What about safe supply though? In other words, there's a lot of fentanyl out there. There's people dying right and left because they are taking drugs they think have one thing, turns out they have another. Would it not be a comfort to a lot of people if they at least felt that there weren't going to be all these people dying regularly because of tainted drugs?
If they had said that in the press release, but what cast doubt in this is the provincial government had no idea this was happening. The federal government had no idea this was happening. Come on, who's asleep at the wheel here? We're talking about people dying, and the safe drug thing I don't think has been fully defined. There's a vending machine in Vancouver right now that actually distributes a drug that is equal, if not more powerful than heroin. But what we found out was kids were actually accessing his drug because they're scared of heroin. And my point is, kids should not even be taking that drug. What are you doing? We're actually normalizing the conversation around drugs, and we're making it okay. Don't take heroin, but take this drug because it's kind of less impactful to your life, less dangerous. When really, I'm just saying, forget it. Don't take any of it. Don't even think about marijuana. I'm prejudiced toward marijuana as well. But I just think that if this is such a health crisis, a community crisis, an OD crisis, then we should be having deeper conversations. And the people of British Columbia have got to be brought in this conversation.
So, final question for you. I guess it comes around reconciliation and what it means to different people, especially to different politicians. You hear different politicians using the word in different ways, and it can have entirely different meanings. And you've been very clear over time that you feel that that's a problem, that politicians are using that word maybe not appropriately for what is really intended and what's necessary. So, I guess what I'm going to ask you is something a little bit outside the track. Where do you see your future as a politician? Are you still content to be the MLA for Skeena and fighting this good fight in BC? Or do you think it's time that your voice be heard on the national stage? Is it time for maybe Ellis Ross to explore becoming, for the sake of argument, an MP for the northwest of the province and getting some of these things across? Because let's face it, a lot of decisions in the future for First Nations revolve around the federal government.
The question that I ask every day is exactly that, and it's mostly because of some of the replies I give in media that wasn't very well thought out. But to be fair, I've actually entertained being an MP for the last 6 years. That was actually the original intent for those around me, and back then I thought, no, I'm not smart enough to be an MP. I'm not even smart enough to be an MLA. And I never really planned anything. I actually just, the only reason I became an MLA was because I saw circumstances were so desperate that I needed to get to a higher place to actually help get LNG across the finish line. On the other side of that as well, I've always had a deep respect and admiration for governance, not politics. I've always tried to research as much as I could in terms of the process, whether we're talking about Victoria or Ottawa, and I do believe it was fundamental to how it contributes to our standard of living here in Canada. And so I don't know. I'm kind of torn on the question because I truly love BC. I truly love what I'm doing, but I'm getting more and more demands on me to actually get a voice on the national level and the international level, by the way. I'm being asked more and more to go and meet with dignitaries from around the world. The latest one here is I've been invited to sit down with the United Kingdom's High Commissioner this Thursday. And so it's not necessarily a question that's coming from me. I think the questions and the responses are coming to me. And
are you being approached? Are you being wooed by any political party we could name that maybe has a blue emblem?
That wear blue suits?
Yes, but to be fair, for the last 6 years, they've been after me for the last 6 years as well. In fact, the reason I really leaned toward them 6 years ago was because I liked the work that they did in working with First Nations and trying to help them become independent, not by giving them money, but developing programs where we could develop capacity around governance, environment, or even changing our election code, for example, or giving us the ability to manage reserve lands. I like that because I've never been a fan of government money going to communities like mine. I've always said, no, we should work towards independence. We should work towards, gaining employment for our people. And so that's why I really lean toward the color blue, as you pointed.
So no final decision, but you are thinking about it.
Yeah, but I'm also thinking about my position here. I'm just not sure where I can provide the most value. Is it with the BC United Party, because I do have a deep affection for BC, the province of BC, and the people in it. But I'm also starting to understand where Canada should be in the geopolitics of energy, for example. And I think I could be part of a larger voice in making sure that Canada has the rightful place. Because look at our resources, look at our natural gas, look at our trade agreement with the United States, for example. There's so many different things that we're underperforming in. And I've said it before, I said, you know what, mainly because we got our head in the sand. We're ignoring what's happening in China and India. We're ignoring what's happening in Germany. If we really want to talk about global issues like emissions and trade, we got to get out there. We got to get out there and be part of that global conversation. And that's what's got me torn right now.
Always good to hear from Ellis Ross, and interesting to see what he decides to do. He's been very effective in the official opposition, and there is certainly a large number of people in this province that would like to see him stay in that job, because he could be a big help for the BC Liberals or BC United in the future as that party tries to reinvent itself and realistically take on the EB government in the next provincial election. On the other hand, if he joined the federal Conservatives, that would also send a big message. And he could be a very big representative for both First Nations, the province, and the energy sector on a different level. So we'll wait and see what he decides. But Johnny, on that happy note, it's pretty well time to say goodbye. And again, thank our many viewers for following the Rumble Room.
There are many is the operative word, Robin. We keep getting more and more. So whatever we're doing, is it movement? Is it content? Is it speakers? Whatever we're doing, it's fun, and other people are joining with us. Yeah, it sure was a great show. So much news. Getting close to 900,000 viewers, Robin, since we started the Rumble Room just under 2 years ago. Feels like yesterday. And we so appreciate everybody's support. And as usual, how to follow us. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook news groups, TikTok, and Instagram. For now, actually forever, I am still John Jurisic. Always a proud Croatian in my background and my heritage, but today and always an even prouder Canadian in my daily life.
And Johnny, I'm proud to sit beside you. I mean, virtually, but I'm still proud to sit beside you. I'm Robin Adair, and rumble on.